Welcome to the Full Nielsen. Today I'm going to be reviewing this Browning Buckmark. I love Browning Buckmarks. I think they are probably the most underrated semi-automatic 22 handgun you can get. They are incredibly accurate, and the features they come with from the factory are just sensational. Many other firearms like this Ruger Mark IV come and they're okay with the way that they come from the factory, but you've got to, at least for me, the factory trigger was not sufficient, and the grip on that gun is not particularly great. And I overall think that the Browning Buckmark, as they come from the factory, is probably a better gun than the Ruger Mark IV. Now you can trick out Ruger Mark IVs and make them really nice, make them as good and maybe even better than a Browning Buckmark. But there are some features I like about this better than what a lot of the Ruger Mark IV's offerings are. And I'll do a comparison video about some of those things in another video. But today I just want to focus on this Browning Buckmark. This is the stainless contour. It's like URX or something model. I can't remember the specific model. I'll put that in the video description and in the notes below to make sure that anybody who's looking for this specific model will be able to find it. But this is the way these things come from the factory. They're just sensational. The one downside I would say is they come with a single 10-round magazine. I wish they included 2 or 3 magazines. But other than that, I think they're great with the way they come from the factory. Now, I'm going to talk about the things I dislike about this firearm first, and then I'll go over all of the things that I like. Things I dislike: I wish they included more magazines from the factory. Another thing I dislike is, in order to completely field strip them, which they don't recommend, but is necessary on occasion depending on how many rounds you run through one of these, you have to remove this top rail, which may potentially disturb your zero. Now you can see the 3 screws in the rail here, and if you take those out, this optic should be able to remain mounted, but I can't guarantee that when you tighten all of this back up that it's going to return to 0 perfectly. It'll probably be pretty close. But cleaning it and the disassembly of this firearm is, if you're completely disassembling it, is not very user-friendly. Now, the upside is you don't have to do that very often. In fact, Browning, I don't think, recommends that you do that ever. But like I said, when you run them a lot, 22s being as dirty as they are, sometimes it's necessary. For the most part, you can just pull this back, and where this breech face is flat the way that it is in there, and the bolt being the way that it is back here, or the slide, you can usually just spray your solvent in here and wipe that down really good, and the thing's good to go. And pull a bore snake through the bore, which I usually do, and usually that's sufficient. But like I said, when you run a lot of rounds through one of these, it may be necessary to completely field strip it, because you're going to get powder residue and stuff like that back inside where the firing pin and this, I can't think of the appropriate term that I want to call this. But anyway, this little bar that the slide tracks helps track, keep things tracking on and all that kind of stuff. There's the ability there's a gap back there for debris and material and stuff to get into. So when you run these things a lot, back in this section, this will start to get dirty, and you'll feel it. Even with the rest of this cleaned up, you'll actually feel the grit and stuff in the slide, and then you'll have to fully disassemble it. So the field stripping is probably the biggest downside to these. Now, that's probably it in terms of the things that I don't like about the Browning Buckmark. Now, the things that I like about them: you can get a lot of different flavors of Browning Buckmark. They make like a rifle versions of it. They make this version stainless. They make black versions. They make light versions with aluminum on the outside for like a barrel shroud type thing, with a very thin steel barrel on the inside to save weight. They have ultralight models like that. They have models with threaded muzzles, all kinds of stuff. So there's a variety of options there. I like the sights that they come with. They're adjustable for windage and elevation, blacked out front, blacked out rear. Now you can get fiber optic sights on these And on some of the other models, if you want fiber optic sights, I have all the models I've used have always had blacked out sights, and I have never had a problem with them. I really enjoy them. On this particular model, I obviously have a red dot mounted on them, and the way that the optics rail is on this, you could mount, and I had mounted just as a joke, a full-blown tactical rifle scope. You can mount a small scope, you can mount red dots. There's a lot of options there with the way that this rail is on top of this thing. So yeah, anyway, so I like the ergonomics of this handgun as well, and the controls on it. Your controls for your slide release is nice and big. It's much bigger than what you have, for example, on this Taurus TX22, where you've got this little tiny thing that's hardly a paddle. This has got a great big massive paddle on it. I really like that control on it. The safety on it's nice and big, and I don't mind that. The magazine release button is great. It protrudes enough that you can hit it without an issue, but doesn't protrude so much that you're going to accidentally drop the magazine out of the gun. The trigger on this gun, the way that it came from the factory, was a little heavy. I have used an older Browning Buckmark that had a really good trigger, and I expected the same trigger from these because they're well renowned for having a pretty good trigger from the factory, and this trigger was a little disappointing for me based off of what I was accustomed to using in other Browning Buckmarks. So I looked up some videos online and found out that without buying any additional parts or any of that kind of stuff, there's like a, they call it like a spring flip or something like that. I made that modification to this, and that reduced the pull weight significantly, and it's much better. It's much more, it's much closer to what I'm accustomed to experiencing with the Browning Buckmark. So the trigger, the way it came from the factory, tolerable. The way it is, if you just make a minor modification, phenomenal. You won't need to buy a new trigger. There's zero creep in the trigger. I don't believe you're supposed to dry fire this gun. You're not supposed to dry fire lots of types of rim fire. Some of them you can. I prefer buying guns that I can dry fire for practice sake. I'm going to dry fire this just to show you. Dry firing a few times probably isn't going to kill the thing, but anyway, you can see very little take up, and then the trigger doesn't creep, doesn't anything. It just breaks. Just sensational trigger, very little travel. Let's look at the reset here. And that's it. So phenomenal trigger from for a Browning Buckmark with that minor modification. So I like the trigger on it. I like the aesthetics of them. I like all the varieties of them that you can get. I really like the grips on these, the way that they come from the factory. They just feel phenomenal, and the way that the gun points and everything, it's just a great feeling gun. Recoil-wise, gun is excellent, and reliability-wise, this gun has also been excellent. I don't think I've had a single malfunction with it yet, and I've probably put maybe 500 rounds through it. My past experience with these has been that if you clean them probably every 800 to 1,000 rounds, you can plan on virtually no problems or virtually no malfunctions. I've run probably 4 or 5 types of bulk ammunition through it. I haven't run any really high-end nice ammunition through it at all. I've run bulk pack Federal, I believe some Remington Golden Bullet or whatever they call that stuff, Remington Thunderbolt, Gila, and one other kind that I can't remember off the top of my head. But anyway, I haven't had any malfunctions with any of that since I've purchased this firearm. And I think I've cleaned it one time, and maybe the 500 or 600 rounds that have probably been run through it. So it's been excellent. And I would say overall, that concludes my review of the Browning Buckmark and the things that I like about it. I think they're excellent. Like I said, one of the most underrated 22 handguns you can get. I think the way they come from the factory, they're better than most other offerings. Oh, there's one other thing I want to mention. The accuracy of these things is superb. These things shoot better than most rifles. They are just incredibly accurate firearms. So that's the last thing I wanted to mention, and that's a pretty big deal. Much more accurate in my experience than a Taurus TX22. TX22 is still accurate. I don't know that this is inherently more accurate or that it's just easier to be accurate with it because the trigger is a better trigger. There's a little bit more weight here with the barrel and how much material there is there compared to the TX22. I can't tell you all the reasons why, but this thing, you can stack round on round on round in exactly the same place, and this one, that's a little bit more of a challenge. But anyway, so Browning Buckmark is excellent firearm. If you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to leave those in the comment section below. If you have any experience with this 22, Browning Buckmark 22, or any other 22 handguns, feel free to share your experiences in the comment section below so that we can all benefit from that. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day.